The November wind cut through the Colorado night like a blade through butter, and Garrett Zachary had never been more grateful for the thick barn walls that kept his horses warm and his hay dry when he heard the soft whimpering sound coming from the loft above. He raised his lantern higher, squinting into the darkness above the ladder, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip before he thought better of it. The sound was too fragile, too human, and distinctly feminine. Garrett climbed the wooden rungs carefully, each creak of the old wood announcing his presence, and when he reached the top, he found her buried in the hay like a wounded animal seeking shelter. She was shivering so violently that the entire pile of dried grass seemed to tremble with her. Her dress was torn in several places, caked with mud and what looked like dried blood, though he could not tell if it was hers. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles around a face so pale it nearly glowed in the lamplight. When she looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes, Garrett felt something in his chest tighten in a way he had not experienced in his 28 years of living. "Please," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Please do not send me back." Garrett set the lantern down on a support beam and shrugged off his heavy coat without hesitation. He draped it over her shoulders, noting how small she seemed beneath the wool and leather. "Back where?" "Anywhere," she said, and he heard the exhaustion in her voice, the kind that went beyond physical tiredness. "Just do not send me back." He studied her for a long moment, taking in the desperation in her expression, the way her hands clutched his coat like it was the only solid thing in a world that had turned liquid and uncertain. Garrett had always been a practical man, the kind who thought things through, who weighed consequences before making decisions. But something about this woman, shivering and broken in his hay, bypassed all of that careful consideration. "You are staying," he said simply. She blinked at him, confusion crossing her features. "What? You are staying here with me? Until you are well, until you are safe, until whenever you need to." He held out his hand to her. "Come on, let me get you into the house where it is warm." "Thank you," she breathed, and the relief in those two words was so profound that Garrett felt it settle into his bones. She placed her small, cold hand in his, and he helped her to her feet. She swayed immediately, and he caught her before she could fall, lifting her into his arms like she weighed nothing more than a sack of grain. She did not protest, merely rested her head against his chest as he descended the ladder one-handed, years of ranch work making the feat easier than it should have been. The walk from the barn to his small house took less than a minute, but in that time, Garrett became acutely aware of the woman in his arms. She smelled of hay and fear and something underneath it all that was distinctly her, something that reminded him of wildflowers after rain. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, and he could feel her heart racing against his chest. Inside, he kicked the door shut behind them and carried her to the settee near the fireplace. The embers from earlier in the evening still glowed, and he quickly added kindling and logs until flames began to lick at the new wood. Only then did he turn his attention back to his unexpected guest. She had pulled his coat tighter around herself and was staring into the growing fire with an expression that was both mesmerized and distant, as if she was seeing something other than the flames before her. "When did you last eat?" Garrett asked, moving to the small kitchen area. "I do not remember," she said softly. 2 days, maybe 3. He set about making coffee and heating up the stew he had made that morning. While he worked, he kept glancing over at her, still half afraid she might disappear like smoke if he looked away too long. She was real, though. Real and here and his responsibility now, because he had told her she was staying and Garrett Zachary never went back on his word. When he brought her a bowl of stew and a cup of coffee, she took them with trembling hands. She ate slowly at first, as if her body had forgotten how, and then with increasing hunger. He let her eat in silence, pulling up a chair nearby and nursing his own coffee. Finally, she set the empty bowl aside and looked at him directly for the first time since they had come inside. Her eyes were green, he realized, the color of new leaves in spring. "My name is Lucia Delacroix," she said, "and I owe you my life." "Garrett Zachary," he replied, "and you do not owe me anything. But if you are willing, I would like to know what you are running from." She took a deep breath, her hands wrapping around the warm coffee cup like it was an anchor. "My uncle. He is a man of considerable influence in El Dorado Canyon. After my parents died last year, he became my guardian. I am 23 years old, but according to the law, an unmarried woman of means requires a male relative to manage her affairs." Her voice turned bitter on those last words. "He decided the best way to manage my affairs was to arrange a marriage to his business partner, a man twice my age with a reputation for violence against his previous 2 wives. When I refused, my uncle locked me in my room and said I would agree or I would starve. I escaped 3 nights ago." Garrett felt anger kindle in his gut, hot and sharp. He had seen enough of the world to know that women often got the short end of the stick when it came to the law and property. But hearing it laid out so plainly, seeing the evidence of her desperate flight in her torn dress and hollow cheeks, made it personal in a way that nothing else could. "He will be looking for you," Garrett said. It was not a question. "Yes, Charles Delacroix does not like losing control of things, especially things that involve money. My parents left me a considerable estate, which reverts to my husband upon marriage. He and Mr. Thornton had already drawn up the papers. They were just waiting for me to sign." She met his eyes. "I would rather die than marry that man." "Then you will not marry him," Garrett said with a certainty he felt in his bones. "You will stay here and you will be safe." "You do not know my uncle. He has men influence. He can make things very difficult for you." "I have dealt with difficult men before." Garrett leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Miss Delacroix, I am not a rich man. This ranch is small, and I work it alone except during roundup when I hire on some help. But it is mine, bought and paid for with money I saved from years of driving cattle and breaking horses. No man tells me what to do on my own land, and no man will take you from here if you do not want to go." She stared at him for a long moment, and he saw something shift in her expression. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me. I could be lying. I could bring nothing but trouble to your door." "You could," he agreed, "but you are not lying. I can see that. And as for the trouble, well, I reckon I can handle whatever comes." He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the dark landscape of his ranch. "Besides, a man who would not help a woman in need is not much of a man at all." Behind him, he heard a soft sound, and when he turned, he saw tears streaming down Lucia's face. Not the desperate tears of earlier, but something quieter, more profound. Relief, maybe, or gratitude, or simply the release of 3 days of terror and exhaustion. "I do not know how to thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "You already did, out in the barn." He grabbed a blanket from the chest by the wall and brought it to her. "Right now you need rest. You can have my bed. I will sleep out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," she protested weakly. "You can and you will. We can argue about it in the morning when you have had some sleep and a proper meal." He gestured toward the bedroom door. "Go on. There is a wash basin in there if you want to clean up, and I will find you something to sleep in." She stood slowly, still wrapped in his coat and the blanket, and moved toward the bedroom. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at him. "Garrett?" "Yes, thank you," he nodded, and she disappeared into the room. He heard the soft sound of her moving around, the splash of water, and then silence. Garrett settled himself on the settee with another blanket and tried to ignore how aware he was of her presence in his house, in his bed, in his life. He had told her she was staying, and he had meant it. But as he lay there listening to the fire pop and crackle, he wondered what exactly he had just gotten himself into. Morning came cold and clear, with frost coating the ground and his breath pluming in the air as Garrett stepped outside to tend to his animals. He had been awake for an hour already, stoking the fire and making breakfast, trying to move quietly so as not to wake Lucia. She had needed the rest, and he was content to let her sleep as long as she wanted. The horses whickered at him as he entered the barn, and he spent some time brushing them down and checking their hooves, mucking out stalls and making sure they had fresh water. The familiar routine calmed his mind, gave him time to think about the situation he now found himself in. Charles Delacroix. Garrett knew the name, though he had never met the man. Delacroix owned one of the larger properties near El Dorado Canyon, as well as interests in several mining operations. The kind of man who was used to getting what he wanted, who saw people as pieces on a board to be moved around for his benefit. The kind of man Garrett had learned to avoid during his years of drifting before settling on this piece of land. But avoiding was not an option anymore. Not with Lucia sleeping in his house, trusting him to keep her safe. He would need to be smart about this. Delacroix would come looking eventually, and when he did, Garrett would need to be ready. Not for violence, necessarily, though he would not shy from that if it came to it, but for the kind of legal maneuvering that men like Delacroix excelled at. When he returned to the house, he found Lucia awake and sitting at the small table, wearing one of his shirts over her dress. She had washed her face and braided her hair, and though she still looked exhausted, there was more color in her cheeks than there had been the night before. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks, honestly." She gestured to the shirt. "I hope you do not mind. My dress was so dirty and this was hanging on the back of the chair. Keep it as long as you need." He moved to the stove where eggs were warming. Hungry, starving. They ate together in comfortable silence, and Garrett found himself watching her when he thought she was not looking. In the morning light streaming through the windows, he could see that she was beautiful in a way that went beyond her features. There was a strength in the set of her jaw, a determination in her eyes that spoke of a will that had not been broken despite everything she had endured. "What will you do?" she asked finally, setting down her fork. "When my uncle comes, tell him the truth. That you are here of your own free will and that you are not leaving unless you want to. He will not accept that. Then he will have to learn to live with disappointment." Garrett finished his coffee. "Miss Delacroix, I need to be honest with you about something. I am not a man with connections or influence. I cannot fight your uncle in the courts or in the salons of polite society. But I can protect you here on this land for as long as you need it. The question is, what do you want to do? Beyond staying safe, what do you want for yourself?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup like it held answers. "I want my freedom," she said finally. "I want to make my own choices, live my own life. My parents left me money and property because they wanted me to be independent. My uncle is perverting their wishes, using their legacy to control me." She looked up at him. "But I do not know how to achieve that. Even if I run, he is still my legal guardian. Even if I hide, he can still claim authority over me and my inheritance." "Unless you marry someone else first," Garrett said slowly, the idea forming even as he spoke. "If you were married, your husband would become your legal guardian, not your uncle." "Yes, but that just trades one cage for another. A husband would have just as much control over me and my property as my uncle does. Not if the husband was willing to give you that freedom." Garrett met her eyes. Not if he signed papers making it clear that your property remains yours, that you have say in all decisions regarding it and yourself. Lucia stared at him, her eyes widening. Are you suggesting that you and I should marry? I am suggesting that it is an option. One that would solve the legal problem and give you the protection of my name and my home. He held up a hand before she could respond. I am not proposing a real marriage, Miss Delacroix. I am proposing a business arrangement. We would marry on paper, establish you as my wife in the eyes of the law, and that would remove your uncle's authority over you. You could live here safely, while we figure out how to secure your inheritance properly. And when it is all settled, when you are truly free, we can go our separate ways if that is what you want. That is an incredibly generous offer, she said slowly. But what do you get out of it? Why would you tie yourself to me legally when it could bring nothing but trouble? Garrett considered the question. He could tell her it was simple decency, doing the right thing, but that was only part of the truth. The whole truth was more complicated, involving the way she had looked at him the night before with such desperate hope, the way she had felt in his arms, light and trusting, the way his empty house had felt less empty with her in it. I am 28 years old, he said instead. I have spent the last decade working other men's ranches, saving every penny, until I could buy this place 3 years ago. I have been so focused on building something of my own that I never took time for anything else. Never courted anyone, never let myself think about a future that included more than just me and my horses. He paused. Maybe I am tired of being alone. Maybe helping you gives my life a purpose beyond just surviving. And maybe when this is all over, we will both be better off than we were before. Lucia studied him for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw. A rough cowboy with calloused hands and sun-weathered skin, a fool making promises he could not keep, or something else entirely. I will not lie to you, Garrett. The idea terrifies me. Not you, but the concept of marriage after everything I have been running from. But I also cannot ignore that what you are offering is exactly what I need. She took a deep breath. If we do this, I want to be clear about expectations. This would be a marriage in name only. Separate sleeping arrangements. No obligations beyond what we agree to, and I would want papers drawn up protecting both of our interests. Agreed on all counts. And if either of us wants out for any reason, we find a way to end it without bitterness. Agreed. She extended her hand across the table. Then I accept your offer, Mr. Zachary, though I think we should at least use first names if we are going to be married. He took her hand, noting how much warmer it was than the night before, how her grip was surprisingly strong. Garrett, Lucia. They shook on it, and Garrett felt like he had just made either the best or worst decision of his life. Time would tell which. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Garrett rode into El Dorado Canyon alone, leaving Lucia at the ranch with strict instructions to stay inside and out of sight. He needed to make arrangements, talk to the right people, and see what the situation was regarding Charles Delacroix's search for his missing niece. The town was buzzing with talk of Lucia's disappearance. Posters had been put up offering a reward for information leading to her safe return, and Charles Delacroix himself was apparently staying at the hotel, coordinating search efforts. The story being told was that Lucia had suffered a breakdown after her parents' deaths and wandered off in a state of confusion. Anyone who saw her was to report immediately to Delacroix or the sheriff. Garrett listened to all of this while nursing a beer at the saloon, keeping his expression neutral and his mouth shut. He learned that the sheriff was in Delacroix's pocket, that most of the prominent citizens in town owed the man favors or money, and that very few people were willing to speak against him publicly. But he also learned that there were whispers, rumors about Delacroix's business partner Thornton and his previous wives, one of whom had died under mysterious circumstances. People might not be willing to speak up, but they were not entirely blind to what was happening. The preacher was a man named Reverend Mitchell, an older gentleman with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. Garrett approached him carefully, feeling out his sympathies before revealing anything about Lucia. "I heard about the missing woman," Garrett said, sitting across from the Reverend in his small office behind the church. "Seems like quite a commotion. Indeed, Mr. Delacroix is quite concerned, as any guardian would be." But there was something in the Reverend's tone that suggested he was choosing his words carefully. "You know him well." "I know of him. He attends services when it suits him, donates generously when he wants something." Reverend Mitchell studied Garrett. "Why do you ask, son?" "This does not seem like idle curiosity." Garrett made a decision. "Because I need to know if you would be willing to perform a marriage ceremony quickly and quietly without asking too many questions about why." The Reverend's eyebrows rose. "That is quite a request. Who is getting married?" "I am. To a woman who needs protection from men who would control her life against her will." There was a long silence, and then Reverend Mitchell leaned back in his chair. "You are talking about Miss Delacroix, are you not? She came to you." "I am not confirming or denying anything until I know where you stand." "I stand," the Reverend said slowly, "on the side of people who need help. I have known Charles Delacroix for 5 years, and in that time I have seen him use his money and position to bend others to his will. I have heard the stories about Thornton, though I cannot prove them, and I saw Miss Delacroix at her parents' funeral, saw how she looked at her uncle like she was a rabbit caught in a trap." He leaned forward. "If she has found somewhere safe, someone willing to protect her, then I would be honored to help facilitate that protection." Relief flooded through Garrett. "Then yes, Reverend, I am asking you to marry us as soon as possible, today if you can manage it. Marriage is a sacred covenant, son. Not something to be entered into lightly. I understand that, but it is also a legal institution, and right now, she needs the legal protections it can offer more than anything else." Reverend Mitchell was quiet for another moment, then nodded. "Bring her here this afternoon. I will have the papers ready. But Mr. Zachary, I will say this. Sacred covenant or legal arrangement, marriage changes people. Changes how they see each other, how they relate to one another. You may be entering this with practical intentions, but life has a way of complicating our neat plans." "I will keep that in mind." Garrett left the church and headed to the office of Walter Harrison, the only lawyer in town who was not directly in Delacroix's orbit. Harrison was a sharp man in his 50s who had moved to Colorado from Boston after some scandal that no one spoke about directly. He listened to Garrett's situation without interruption, his fingers steepled under his chin. "What you are proposing is perfectly legal," Harrison said when Garrett finished. "A woman can choose her own husband, and once married, her guardian's authority over her ceases. However, Mr. Delacroix will certainly contest this. He may claim that Miss Delacroix was coerced or that she is not of sound mind. Can he succeed with that argument? Possibly, if he can convince a judge. But it would take time, and in the meantime, you would have the law on your side as her husband." Harrison pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. "I can draw up documents protecting her property rights within the marriage, ensuring that her inheritance remains solely hers. Such arrangements are not common, but they are legal. However, I must warn you that Delacroix will not take this lying down. He stands to lose a considerable amount of money and control. Let him come. I am not afraid of Charles Delacroix." Harrison looked at him seriously. "Perhaps you should be. He is not a man who accepts defeat gracefully. Neither am I. The lawyer smiled slightly. "Very well. Bring Miss Delacroix by after your ceremony and we will make everything official. And Mr. Zachary, I hope you know what you are doing, because once you start down this path, there is no easy way back." Garrett returned to the ranch late in the morning to find Lucia pacing the small confines of the house like a caged animal. She whirled when he entered, relief and anxiety warring on her face. "Well, Reverend Mitchell will marry us this afternoon. Mr. Harrison will draw up the papers protecting your property, and your uncle is in town, staying at the hotel and making a spectacle of his search for you." Lucia sank into a chair. "So we are really doing this. We do not have to. If you have changed your mind, if you want to try another way, we can figure something else out." "No, you were right. This is the fastest, cleanest solution to the legal problem." She looked up at him. "I just never imagined my wedding day would be like this. A rushed ceremony to escape one threat, marrying a man I have known for less than a week." Garrett crossed the room and knelt beside her chair so they were at eye level. "Listen to me, Lucia. This does not have to be your real wedding day. This is just paperwork, just legal protection. Someday, when you are truly free and safe, if you meet someone you want to marry for real, we will find a way to undo this. You can have the wedding you always imagined with the person you choose. And what about you? You are giving up your freedom for mine. What if you meet someone?" He had not let himself think about that possibility, had trained himself over the years not to think about a future that included a partner. But looking at her now, with the morning light catching in her dark hair and those green eyes filled with concern for him despite everything she was going through, he found that he could not imagine wanting to meet anyone else. "Then we will deal with that when it happens," he said instead. "For now, let us just focus on getting you safe." She reached out and touched his cheek, her fingers feather light against his skin. "You are a good man, Garrett Zachary, better than I deserve." "You deserve a hell of a lot better than what you have been given," he said roughly, standing up before he could do something stupid like lean into her touch. "Now, we should probably make you presentable for a wedding. Do you have anything other than that torn dress?" "Just what I am wearing, which is your shirt and my old dress. Then we will stop by the general store on the way into town and get you something proper. A bride should have a nice dress, even for a practical wedding." The smile she gave him was small but genuine, and it did strange things to his heart. They rode into El Dorado Canyon in the early afternoon, Lucia sitting side saddle behind Garrett on his best horse, her arms wrapped around his waist. He had told her to keep her head down and her face hidden until they were safely at the general store, and she complied, pressing her face against his back. At the store, they found a simple but pretty dress in deep blue that fit Lucia well enough with a few quick adjustments from the proprietor's wife. The woman asked no questions, though her eyes were curious, and Garrett paid in cash before ushering Lucia out through the back entrance. They made their way to the church by a roundabout route, avoiding the main street and the hotel where Charles Delacroix was staying. Garrett kept his hand near his revolver and his eyes alert, but they reached the small church without incident. Reverend Mitchell was waiting for them, along with 2 witnesses he had arranged, his wife and Walter Harrison, who had come from his office with a sheaf of papers. The church was empty except for them, quiet and cool in the afternoon light filtering through the simple windows. "Miss Delacroix," Reverend Mitchell said gently, "are you here of your own free will? Are you entering this marriage willingly and without coercion?" "I am," Lucia said clearly. "Mr. Zachary has offered me protection and freedom, and I accept both willingly." "And you, Mr. Zachary? Do you understand the commitment you are making?" "I do." The ceremony was brief, none of the elaborate ritual that usually accompanied weddings. just the essential vows, the legal words that bound them together in the eyes of the law and God. When it came time to exchange rings, Garrett realized with embarrassment that he had none to offer. But Lucia simply took his hand and said her vows without one, her voice steady and sure. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Mitchell said. "You may kiss the bride if you wish." Garrett looked at Lucia, and she looked back at him, and for a moment the air between them seemed charged with something neither of them wanted to name. Then she stood on her toes and pressed a quick, chaste kiss to his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, so quietly that only he could hear. They signed the papers, first the marriage certificate, and then the legal documents that Harrison had prepared protecting Lucia's property rights. It was all very businesslike and practical, but as they finished and Garrett saw Lucia Zachary written in her neat handwriting, something in his chest tightened. She was his wife now. In name, in law, in fact. And he was responsible for her safety and her future and her happiness. It was a weight he had never expected to carry. But now that it was on his shoulders, he found he did not mind it as much as he thought he would. They left the church, as the sun was beginning to lower in the sky, and Garrett helped Lucia onto the horse before mounting behind her. They were almost to the edge of town when they heard a shout. "That is her. That is my niece." Garrett turned to see a well-dressed man pointing at them from the doorway of the hotel, several other men emerging behind him. Charles Delacroix was tall and silver-haired, with the kind of commanding presence that came from years of getting his own way. His face was flushed with anger and something else, something that looked almost like panic. "Stop them," Delacroix shouted. "She is not well, she needs help." But before any of the men could move, Reverend Mitchell stepped out of the church, his voice carrying across the street. "Charles, that woman is not your niece anymore. She is Mrs. Lucia Zachary, legally married as of an hour ago. She is under her husband's protection now, not yours." Delacroix froze, his face going from red to white and back to red again. "That is impossible. She would never marry without my permission. She is not capable of making such decisions." "I am perfectly capable," Lucia called out, her voice ringing clear in the evening air. "I am of sound mind and legal age, and I have married Mr. Zachary of my own free will. You no longer have any authority over me, Uncle Charles." "You do not know what you are doing," Delacroix said, and his voice had turned cold and dangerous. "That man is nobody. He cannot give you the life you deserve. Come back with me, and we will forget all of this foolishness." "The only foolishness was trusting you to honor my parents' wishes," Lucia said. "I will never go back with you. I am staying with my husband." Garrett felt a surge of pride at the strength in her voice, the way she held herself tall and unafraid despite facing the man who had terrorized her. He urged the horse forward, wanting to put distance between them and Delacroix before the situation could escalate further. "This is not over," Delacroix called after them. "You hear me, Zachary? This is far from over." Garrett did not respond, just kept riding, Lucia's arms tight around his waist and her head resting against his back. They rode in silence until they were clear of town, until the ranch came into view in the gathering dusk. Only when they were safely inside the house, with the door locked behind them, did Lucia finally let herself shake. Garrett caught her as her knees buckled, guiding her to the settee and kneeling in front of her. "You did so well," he said, taking her hands in his. They were ice cold despite the warmth of the day. "You were so brave." "I do not feel brave," she said, her voice trembling. "I feel terrified." "Did you see his face? He is going to come after us, Garrett. He is going to try to take me back. He can try. But you are my wife now, and I protect what is mine." The words came out more possessive than he had intended, but he meant them. "I will not let him hurt you, Lucia. I promise you that." She looked at him, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. "Why are you doing this? And do not tell me it is just because it is the right thing to do. There is more to it than that." He wanted to lie, to give her some easy answer that would not complicate the arrangement they had made. But looking into her eyes, he found he could not. "I do not know," he admitted. "When I found you in the barn, shivering and scared, something in me just decided that you were mine to protect. That I would do whatever it took to keep you safe. Maybe it is because I know what it is like to feel helpless, to have no control over your own life. I spent years working for other men, living by their rules, having nothing of my own. When I finally got this place, this piece of land that belongs to me, I swore I would never let anyone take from me what was mine again. And somehow you became part of that, part of what I am protecting." "I am not yours, though," she said softly. "Not really. This is just an arrangement." "I know." He stood up, suddenly uncomfortable with how much he had revealed. "But arrangements or not, I made you a promise, and I keep my promises." That night, they maintained the boundaries they had established. Garrett slept on the settee while Lucia took the bedroom. But he lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the house settling, the wind outside and the soft breathing from the other room. His wife was sleeping in his bed, wearing his old shirt, safe under his roof. It should have felt strange, uncomfortable, temporary. Instead, it felt right in a way that nothing else in his life ever had. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm that surprised both of them with its naturalness. Garrett worked the ranch during the day while Lucia kept the house, cooked meals, and slowly began to relax into her new life. They were careful around each other at first, painfully polite, both aware of the unusual nature of their arrangement. But gradually, they began to talk. In the evenings by the fire, over meals at the small table, during the quiet moments between tasks, they shared pieces of themselves. Garrett told her about his childhood on a struggling farm in Kansas, about his father dying when he was 15 and leaving him to support his mother and sisters, about working as a cowhand, driving cattle north, saving every penny until he could buy this land in Colorado. Lucia told him about growing up the cherished only child of wealthy parents, about her mother teaching her to read Latin and her father encouraging her education in ways that were unusual for a girl, about their deaths in a carriage accident, about how Charles had arrived at the funeral with papers already prepared, about how quickly her life had changed from free and hopeful to trapped and desperate. "I tried to fight him legally at first," she said one evening, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "But every lawyer I went to told me the same thing. As an unmarried woman, I needed a male guardian, and the courts would not override my uncle's authority without extraordinary evidence of wrongdoing. Being unpleasant and controlling was not enough." "The law is set up to protect men like your uncle," Garrett said, anger coloring his voice. "It makes me sick. It made me feel helpless. I have money, education, intelligence, but none of that mattered because I am a woman." She looked at him. "You cannot understand how it feels to be reduced to property, to have your whole life dictated by someone else. You are right. I cannot understand exactly, but I have been poor, owned nothing, had no say in my own life. It is not the same, but I know the feeling of being trapped." She reached across the table and took his hand, and the gesture felt natural, comfortable. "Thank you for understanding, or trying to anyway." During the day, when Garrett was working outside, Lucia began to explore the ranch. She was not accustomed to physical labor, but she was intelligent and willing to learn. She started helping with small tasks, feeding the chickens he kept, gathering eggs, weeding the kitchen garden that had been neglected since the previous summer. One afternoon, he came back from checking fence lines to find her in the corral with one of his horses, a gentle mare named Daisy. Lucia was brushing her carefully, talking to her in a low voice, and the horse was leaning into the attention with obvious pleasure. "She likes you," Garrett said, leaning on the fence. Lucia looked up, a genuine smile on her face. "I like her too. I used to ride when I was younger before my parents died. I had forgotten how peaceful it can be being with horses. Would you like to ride again? I could teach you if you are rusty." "I would love that." So they added riding lessons to their evenings, with Garrett teaching Lucia to handle the horses with the same patient attention he gave to everything. She was a quick learner, and soon she was riding confidently around the property, her face flushed with exercise and joy. Watching her ride, her hair streaming behind her and laughter on her lips, Garrett felt something shift in his chest. This was supposed to be temporary, practical, an arrangement that would end when Lucia no longer needed his protection. But somewhere along the way, he had stopped thinking of her as an obligation and started thinking of her as simply Lucia, his wife. The woman who made his small house feel like a home, who smiled at him over morning coffee, who fell asleep reading by the fire and had to be gently woken to go to bed. He was falling for her, he realized with something like panic. Falling for his wife in an arrangement that was never supposed to be real. The problem was, he had no idea if she felt the same way. 3 weeks after their wedding, Charles Delacroix finally made his move. He arrived at the ranch with the sheriff and 2 other men, all of them armed and official-looking. Garrett had been expecting something like this, and when he saw them riding up the path, he called for Lucia to stay inside and went out to meet them alone. "Mr. Zachary," the sheriff said, a man named Coleman who Garrett knew was firmly in Delacroix's pocket. "We need to speak with your wife." "What about?" Delacroix dismounted, his face a mask of concern that did not reach his eyes. "I simply want to ensure that my niece is well, and that she entered this marriage willingly. Surely you can understand my concern, given her fragile state after her parents' deaths." "She is not fragile, and she entered the marriage willingly. We have already established that." "Nevertheless, I would like to hear it from her directly." Delacroix moved toward the house, but Garrett stepped in front of him. "You are not welcome in my home. I have the sheriff with me. I have every right to check on the welfare of my niece. She is not your niece anymore. She is my wife, and you have no rights where she is concerned." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Now, Mr. Zachary, let us not make this difficult. Mr. Delacroix has raised concerns about the circumstances of your marriage. If Mrs. Zachary can simply confirm that she is here willingly and is being treated well, we can all go about our business." Garrett weighed his options. He could refuse and force a confrontation, but that would only escalate things. Or he could let Lucia speak for herself and trust that she would handle it. She had been strong in town after the wedding. He had to believe she would be strong now. "Wait here," he said finally. He went inside and found Lucia standing by the window, watching the men outside. She was pale but composed. "I heard," she said. "I need to go out there, do I not? Only if you want to, I can send them away." "No, I need to face him. I need to make it clear that I am done being afraid of him." She walked out onto the porch with her head high, and Garrett followed, staying close enough to intervene if needed. Delacroix's expression shifted when he saw her, something predatory flickering across his features before he schooled it back to concern. "Lucia, my dear, I have been so worried about you." "Have you?" Her voice was cool. "Or have you been worried about the money you will lose now that you can no longer control me? I do not know what lies this man has told you, but I only ever wanted what was best for you. You wanted what was best for yourself. You tried to force me to marry a violent man so you could maintain control of my inheritance. You locked me in a room and threatened to starve me. Those are not the actions of someone who cares about my well-being." The sheriff, looked uncomfortable. "Miss, I mean Mrs. Zachary, are you saying that Mr. Delacroix mistreated you?" "I am saying he tried to force me into a marriage I did not want, and when I refused, he imprisoned me. I escaped and came here, where Mr. Zachary offered me protection and a way to secure my freedom. I married him willingly, I am staying with him willingly, and I want nothing more to do with my uncle." "You are confused," Delacroix said, his voice hardening. "You are still grieving your parents. This man took advantage of your vulnerable state." "I took advantage of nothing," Garrett said. "She came to me, I helped her. That is all. Sheriff, I insist that you take Lucia into protective custody until a proper evaluation of her mental state can be conducted." "On what grounds?" Garrett demanded. "On the grounds that she is clearly not thinking rationally." "No woman in her right mind would choose this," he gestured dismissively at the ranch at Garrett, "over the life and security I could provide." "I would," Lucia said clearly. "I choose this. I choose him. I choose freedom over wealth if wealth comes with chains." She moved to stand beside Garrett, taking his hand. "My husband respects me, treats me as an equal, protects me without trying to control me. That is worth more than all the money in the world." The sheriff looked between them, then at Delacroix, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "I do not see grounds for intervention here, Mr. Delacroix. The lady seems clear-headed to me, and she is legally married, unless you have evidence of actual wrongdoing." "This is not over," Delacroix said, but there was a note of defeat in his voice. He turned to Lucia. "You are making a mistake. When you realize that and come crawling back, do not expect me to be generous." "I will not be coming back," Lucia said. "Ever." They stood and watched as the men mounted their horses and rode away. Delac, while looking back once with an expression of such hatred that it sent a chill down Garrett's spine. When they were finally out of sight, Lucia sagged against him, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her up. "You were amazing," he said into her hair, "so strong. I was terrified. You did not show it. You faced him down and sent him away." She pulled back to look up at him, and he was startled to see tears in her eyes. "I could not have done it without you standing there. Knowing you were beside me, that you would protect me if he tried anything, that gave me the courage to stand up to him. You have always had that courage. You just needed the space to use it." She reached up and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "How did I get so lucky as to end up in your barn that night?" "I think I am the lucky one," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other, and Garrett felt the last of his resistance crumbling. This was not an arrangement anymore, not a practical solution to a legal problem. This was real, and he wanted it to be real, wanted her to be his wife in every sense of the word. But he did not know how to tell her that without risking everything they had built. That night, something between them shifted. They sat by the fire after dinner, and Lucia was quieter than usual, staring into the flames with a contemplative expression. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked finally. "About what I said to my uncle. About choosing this life over the one he could provide." She looked at him. "I meant it, you know. I am not staying here because I have no other option. I am staying because I want to." "I am glad," he said carefully. "Are you? Because we agreed this was temporary. That when I was safe and secure, we would go our separate ways. But I do not want that anymore, Garrett. I want this to be real." His heart stuttered in his chest. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I care about you. More than I should, probably, given how we started. But these past weeks, getting to know you, living with you, being your wife in name, it has made me want to be your wife in truth." She stood and moved to where he sat, kneeling in front of him just as he had done for her that first morning. "I do not know if you feel the same way. Maybe you still see this as an obligation, a promise you made. But I needed to tell you how I feel. I needed to be honest. Garrett reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. Lucia, I have been falling for you since the moment I found you in that barn. Every day since has just made it worse. Made it better. He laughed shakily. I did not want to tell you because I did not want to pressure you, did not want you to feel obligated to return feelings for the man who helped you. You are not just the man who helped me. You are the man who respected me enough to give me choices, who made me feel safe for the first time in over a year, who makes me laugh and challenges me and looks at me like I am the most important thing in the world. She covered his hands with hers. I love you, Garrett Zachary. I love you too, he said and kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste peck at their wedding. This was a real kiss, deep and hungry and full of all the feelings they had been holding back. Her hands tangled in his hair, and he pulled her up into his lap, never breaking contact. When they finally parted for air, they were both breathing hard, their foreheads pressed together. We should probably talk about expectations again, Lucia said, a note of humor in her voice. Probably, Garrett agreed. But right now, I really just want to keep kissing you. I can agree to that. So they did, and the fire burned low while they learned each other, while the practical arrangement transformed into something neither of them had expected but both of them wanted more than anything. Later, much later, they moved to the bedroom together. Garrett had been sleeping on the settee for weeks, maintaining the boundaries they had established, but those boundaries no longer applied. Lucia took his hand and led him to the bed they would now share, and as they lay together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, Garrett felt a contentment he had never known before. "Are you happy?" he asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her back. "I am happier than I have been in a very long time," she said. "Maybe happier than I have ever been. Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way. That is a big promise. I am a man who keeps his promises." She tilted her head up to kiss him again, soft and sweet. "I know you are. It is one of the things I love about you." The winter passed in a haze of happiness that neither of them had anticipated. They fell into a new rhythm, one that involved shared responsibilities and shared affection. Lucia continued to help with the ranch work, learning new skills and taking pride in her growing competence. Garrett found himself working faster, eager to finish his chores so he could return to the house, and the woman waiting for him there. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about the books she loved, and he brought home every volume he could find in town. He taught her to shoot, to rope cattle, to read the weather in the clouds. She taught him to read more than just basic words, helped him write better, opened up worlds in books he had never thought to explore. "You are a good student," she said one evening, watching him labor over a letter to his mother and sisters back in Kansas. "I have a good teacher," he replied, looking up at her with such affection that she felt her heart squeeze. "You should invite them to visit. I would like to meet your family." "They would love you," he said. "My mother has been after me for years to settle down and marry. She will be thrilled. Even though the circumstances were unusual, she will not care about that. She will only care that I am happy." He set down the pen and pulled Lucia into his lap. "Which I am, happier than I have any right to be." In February, Walter Harrison rode out to the ranch with news. He had been working on securing Lucia's inheritance, navigating the legal complexities created by her marriage and Delacroix's attempts to block access to the funds. The news was mostly good. The court had ruled that, as a married woman, Lucia's property passed to her husband's control, but with the pre-marriage agreement Harrison had drawn up, that control was limited. Garrett could not sell or mortgage her property without her consent, and she maintained rights to income generated by her holdings. Delacroix tried to argue that the marriage was fraudulent, Harrison explained, sitting in their small parlor with coffee. But the evidence against him was too strong. I found one of the housemaids who was willing to testify that she heard him threatening you, and Thornton's former wife came forward with her own story of abuse. Between all of that, the judge was not inclined to rule in Delacroix's favor. "So it is over?" Lucia asked, her hand tight in Garrett's. "Not entirely. Delacroix still has access to some of the funds as the executor of your parents' estate until you turn 25, but his authority is greatly limited now, and he cannot force any decisions on you. And in 2 years, when you reach that age, you will have complete control." 2 years, Lucia said. "I can live with that." After Harrison left, they sat together on the settee processing the news. It was a relief, knowing that the legal battle was essentially won, that Delacroix's power over her life was broken. But it was also a reminder that their marriage had started as a practical solution, not a love match. "Are you having second thoughts?" Garrett asked quietly. "Now that you do not need the marriage for protection, are you asking if I am going to leave?" "I suppose I am." She turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "Listen to me very carefully, Garrett Zachary. I married you for protection, yes. But I fell in love with you because of who you are, because you are kind and strong and honorable, because you make me laugh and you challenge me and you treat me like an equal partner. I am not staying because I need to. I am staying because I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Do you understand? The relief that flooded through him was almost painful in its intensity. "I understand, and I love you, so much that sometimes I do not know what to do with it all." "Then show me," she said, and he did. Spring came to the ranch with a burst of green and new life. The snow melted, revealing grass and wildflowers. The horses grew sleek and healthy, and Garrett's small herd of cattle thrived. And in the middle of all this growth and renewal, Lucia realized she was pregnant. She told Garrett one morning over breakfast, nervous and excited and a little scared. They had talked about the possibility, had agreed that they wanted children eventually, but the reality of it was different from the abstract idea. "Are you sure?" he asked, standing so quickly his chair fell backwards. "As sure as I can be. I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings." He crossed to her and knelt beside her chair, his hands gentle on her stomach. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Happy does not even begin to cover it. He looked up at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. "I never thought I would have this. A family of my own. Someone to carry on after me, to inherit this land that I have worked so hard for. And to have that with you, with the woman I love more than anything, it is more than I ever dreamed possible." She leaned down and kissed him. "I love you. I love you too, both of you." The pregnancy was not easy. Lucia was sick frequently in the early months, and as she grew larger, simple tasks became difficult. But Garrett was patient and attentive, taking over more of the housework and making sure she rested. He brought her water when she was sick, rubbed her back when it ached, and talked to her stomach at night, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Lucia said one evening, watching him talk to her rounded belly. "I hope so. I did not have much of an example growing up. My father worked himself to death trying to provide for us, but he was never really present, you know, always worried, always stressed. You are not like that. You work hard, but you also know how to enjoy life, how to be present in the moment." "I learned that from you," he said, moving up to kiss her. "You taught me that life is more than just surviving, that it can be beautiful and joyful too." In September, when the leaves were just starting to turn gold and the air had that crisp autumn feel, Lucia went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Garrett thought he might lose both her and the baby. He paced outside while the doctor he had summoned from El Dorado Canyon worked inside, praying to a God he was not sure he believed in, making bargains he knew he could not keep. When he finally heard the baby cry, strong and healthy, he nearly collapsed with relief. The doctor emerged, looking tired but pleased. "You have a son, Mr. Zachary, a big, healthy boy, and your wife came through like a champion. She is tired, but she is fine." Garrett rushed inside to find Lucia propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted but glowing with happiness, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up when he entered, and her smile was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Meet our son," she said. He approached carefully, almost afraid, and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. The baby was red and wrinkled and perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that seemed to already be taking in the world. "He is amazing," Garrett whispered, reaching out a finger that the baby immediately grasped with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, going back and forth on various options. But looking at their son now, Lucia said, "What about James?" "After your father." Garrett felt his throat tighten. His father had not been perfect, had worked himself into an early grave, but he had done it out of love for his family. "James is perfect. James Zachary." He sat on the edge of the bed, and Lucia carefully transferred the baby into his arms. Garrett held his son for the first time, feeling the weight of this new life, this new responsibility, and he made a silent promise. He would do better than his own father had. He would work hard, yes, but he would also be present. He would make sure his children knew they were loved, that they were wanted, that they were the best thing that had ever happened to him. "I love you," he said to Lucia, looking up from their son. "Thank you for him, for us, for everything." "I love you too," she said, reaching out to touch his face. "And this is only the beginning." The years that followed were full in the way that lives are full when they are truly lived. James grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father around the ranch like a shadow, learning to ride almost before he could walk. When he was 2, Lucia became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, a quiet, thoughtful girl who had her mother's eyes and her father's determination. The ranch prospered. With Lucia's inheritance finally fully under her control, they were able to expand the operation, buying more cattle and horses, hiring on permanent help. But they were careful not to let the growth overwhelm them, not to let success distance them from the work and the land that had brought them together. Charles Delacroix, after losing his legal battle, had left Colorado entirely. Rumors said he had moved to San Francisco, where he tried to rebuild his fortune with less success than he had enjoyed in El Dorado Canyon. Lucia did not think of him often, but when she did, it was without bitterness. He had inadvertently given her the greatest gift by trying to control her, because his tyranny had driven her into the arms of the man she loved. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Garrett planned a surprise. He arranged for the children to spend the night with a neighboring family and rode with Lucia back to the barn where they had first met. It was a warm summer evening, and the hay smelled sweet and fresh, cut just days before. "Why are we here?" Lucia asked, though she was smiling. "Because this is where it all started, where I found you shivering and scared, and my whole life changed." He took her hand and led her up to the loft, where he had spread blankets and brought a picnic dinner. "I wanted to remind us both of how far we have come." They sat together in the same spot where she had hidden 5 years before, eating and talking and watching the sun set through the open loft door. When darkness fell and stars began to appear, Garrett pulled her close. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Running away that night, ending up here with me?" Never. Not for a single moment. She kissed him softly. You saved me, Garrett, not just from my uncle, but from a life without love, without purpose, without joy. You gave me everything I did not even know I was missing. You saved me right back, he said. I was so lonely before you came. I had the land and the work, but nothing to give it meaning. You gave me that meaning. You and the children, this life we have built together, it is everything I ever wanted but never thought I would have. They made love in the hay that night, and it was both like and unlike that first night 5 years before when they had finally admitted their feelings. There was still passion, still hunger, but there was also a deep, abiding love that came from years of partnership and shared joy and weathering storms together. When James was 7 and Sarah 5, Lucia gave birth to twins, a boy and girl they named Michael and Emily. The house that had once been too big for just Garrett now felt almost too small with 4 children running through it, filling it with noise and laughter and occasional chaos. Garrett's mother and sisters finally made the trip from Kansas to meet the family, and they fell in love with Lucia and the children immediately. His mother pulled him aside one evening during their visit and said, "You did good, son. You found yourself a real partner, someone who makes you better. Your father would be proud." "I hope so," Garrett said, watching Lucia play with the children in the yard. "I try every day to be the man she deserves. She does not need you to be perfect. She just needs you to be present and loving, and you are both of those things." His mother patted his cheek. "Now stop being so serious and go play with your family." As the children grew, Garrett and Lucia made sure to teach them the value of hard work, but also the importance of education and independent thinking. They wanted their children to have choices, to be able to forge their own paths. James showed an early aptitude for ranching and declared his intention to take over the operation when he was older. Sarah loved books and learning and talked about becoming a teacher. The twins were still young, but they were already showing distinct personalities. On quiet nights after the children were in bed, Garrett and Lucia would sit on the porch and watch the stars, talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in the companionship that came from years of love and partnership. "You remember when you told me I was staying?" Lucia asked one such night, her head on his shoulder. "Of course, best decision I ever made. I was so scared then. Scared of my uncle, scared of the future, scared of trusting anyone. But you made me feel safe, and that was the beginning of everything. You thanked me that night in the barn. And I thought that was all it would ever be. A woman in need, a brief intersection of our lives, and then we would both move on. I had no idea that you would become my whole world." She lifted her head to look at him. "I love you, Garrett Zachary. I have loved you for so long now that I cannot remember what it was like not to love you. I love you too, Lucia. More every day, which I did not think was possible, but somehow it keeps growing." They kissed under the stars, 2 people who had found each other by chance and stayed together by choice, building a life that was richer and more fulfilling than either had imagined possible. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also deep, abiding joy. James grew into a strong young man who ran the ranch with his father, and when he turned 21, he married a girl from town and brought her home to start his own family. Sarah finished school and went to Denver to attend a teaching college, writing home faithfully every week. The twins were teenagers now, Michael interested in horses and Emily in medicine, both of them talking about their futures with excitement and confidence. Garrett, now in his 50s, had silver threading through his hair and lines around his eyes, but he was still strong and vital, still working the land he loved. Lucia had aged too, but Garrett thought she was more beautiful now than she had been at 23. Her beauty deepened by years of living and loving and growing. They stood in the barn one evening, the same barn where they had met nearly 30 years before, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Garrett had his arm around Lucia's waist, and she was leaning into him, comfortable and content. "You ever think about that night?" he asked. "When I found you here, I think about it all the time. How different my life would have been if I had not run away, if I had ended up somewhere else, if you had not told me I was staying. I could not have let you go. Something in me knew even then that you were meant to be mine. And you were meant to be mine." She turned in his arms to face him. "We have had a good life, have we not? The best life, better than I ever dreamed possible. What do you think happens next, when the children are all grown and gone, when it is just us again? Then we get to enjoy each other without interruption. Travel, maybe, see some of the world beyond this ranch, or just sit on the porch and watch the sunset every evening. As long as I am with you, I do not care what we do." She kissed him, slow and deep, a kiss that held 30 years of love and passion and partnership. "I feel the same way. You are my home, Garrett, not this ranch, not this house. You, and you are mine." They stood there in the barn as darkness fell, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found each other in the most unexpected way and built a love that had lasted decades. Behind them was a lifetime of memories. The fear and hope of that first night, the practical wedding that had become real love, the birth of their children, the struggles and triumphs of building a life together. Before them was a future that held uncertainty but also promise, because whatever came, they would face it together. "Thank you," Lucia whispered, echoing the words she had said so many years ago. "For what? For telling me I was staying, for keeping me safe, for loving me." "You are staying," Garrett said, echoing his words from that long-ago night. "Forever, because I love you and I am never letting you go." And there, in the barn where their story had begun, they sealed that promise with a kiss. Two souls who had found each other in the darkness and created a light that would shine for generations to come. The ranch they had built together would pass to their children and grandchildren, a legacy of love and hard work. But more than the land or the livestock or the buildings, they would leave behind the story of how they had met, how they had chosen each other, how they had built a life from nothing but hope and determination and love. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Lucia looked up at the stars and thought about the young woman she had been, shivering in the hay and terrified of the future. That woman could never have imagined this life, this love, this happiness. But she had been brave enough to run, brave enough to accept help, brave enough to let herself fall in love with a cowboy who had offered her nothing but protection and ended up giving her the world. And Garrett thought about the lonely man he had been, working his land alone, thinking that was all his life would ever be. He had found Lucia by chance, but keeping her, loving her, building this life with her that had been choice. The best choice he had ever made. Inside the house, they could hear James and his wife putting their young children to bed, the next generation already taking root on the land Garrett and Lucia had fought so hard to protect and grow. Sarah was coming home for a visit next week, bringing her new husband. Michael had just been accepted to a veterinary program, and Emily was corresponding with a female doctor in Denver about apprenticing. The family they had created, the love they had nurtured, it was spreading outward in ripples that would touch lives they would never even meet. That night, lying in bed with Lucia's head on his chest and her hand over his heart, Garrett felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. This was what life was supposed to be. Not perfect, not without challenges or heartache, but full of love and purpose and connection. He had started with nothing but a piece of land and a dream. Now he had everything that mattered. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Lucia whispered back. "Always." And in the quiet of the Colorado night, with the wind rustling through the cottonwoods and the horses moving softly in their stalls, two people who had found each other against all odds held each other close and counted themselves blessed beyond measure. The years stretched ahead of them still, years that would bring more grandchildren, more changes, more challenges and triumphs. But whatever came, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else. Two people who had started as strangers, who had become partners out of necessity, and who had transformed that partnership into a love story for the ages. A cowboy had found a woman shivering in his hay. She had said thank you. He had said she was staying. And from those simple beginnings, they had built a life that was anything but simple, a love that was anything but ordinary, and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. As Garrett drifted off to sleep, Lucia warm and safe in his arms, he thought about that young man he had been, walking into his barn with a lantern, hearing that soft, whimpering sound. He wanted to go back and tell that young man not to be afraid, that the scared woman in the hay would become the love of his life, that everything was about to change in the best possible way. But he could not go back, could only go forward. And going forward with Lucia by his side, with the family they had created and the love they shared, was more than enough. It was everything. The next morning would bring new challenges, new work, new moments to treasure. But tonight, in this perfect moment, Garrett Zachary held his wife close and knew that he was the luckiest man alive. And Lucia, feeling her husband's heartbeat slow as he fell asleep, thought about the terrified girl who had hidden in a stranger's barn, who had taken a desperate chance on a kind cowboy's offer of protection. That girl had been brave, braver than she knew, and her bravery had been rewarded with a lifetime of love. They slept, and the ranch slept around them, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and the story that had begun in fear and cold had transformed into something warm and beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of love and choice and two people who had refused to give up on each other or themselves. This was their happy ending, earned through struggle and sacrifice, built on respect and trust and deep, abiding love. Not perfect but real, not easy but worth it. And as the dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, bringing a new day to the ranch in Colorado where a cowboy and a woman who had once been shivering in his hay had built their life together, the future stretched ahead, full of promise and hope and the absolute certainty that whatever came, they would face it together, as they always had, as they always would, for the rest of their days.